if I can be heard, but it is what it is. Okay, sorry I'll be back and forth today, but I am here. And now I am painting. I was about to say, if you can't hear me, just tell me, except you wouldn't hear me say, if you can't hear me, just tell me. I'm doing a little work on the background right now. I want to get a bit more of this contrast in. So what I'm doing first is I'm laying down water, just a thin layer of water, where I want my next bit of color to go. And the way this works is not really doing a wash. It looks like a wash, but I'm actually just kind of dumping color on until it blends. So I'm starting with this really deep magenta that I love because it looks like burgundy, but they swear it's magenta. Give it a nice kind of a brick colored background to sit on. And then I'm going to swap over to a bit of sepia. It's kind of a yellowy brown. It's not a very pretty brown, and it's going to look kind of god-awful on here. But yellow and purple are opposites on the color wheel, and since my next color is going to be a purple, giving it a yellowish tone is going to help with the brown I want. So I'm hopping over and grabbing some purple. This whole time I'm working while it's very wet. Everything's just being allowed to blend together. I'm not waiting for it to dry or anything like that. But you can see when I add the purple how much it darkens everything up. It's still not quite red enough for me, so I'm going to go back to that deep magenta that I like. And at this point, if I brush, I'm going to end up actually pushing the bottom layer of paint away. So what I'm doing is I'm loading my brush up with pigment, so it's really wet. I don't know if you can see that. And then I'm just tapping so that it gets the pigment into the water, and then it spreads naturally. It's a nice dark color. I'm going to be pausing now and then because I'm having a conversation in another chat, but this needs to dry a little bit anyways. as you can see, none of the paint is spreading beyond where the water is, which is why we lay the layer of water down first to define these lines that I want to keep white. You can go over later with gouache or acrylic if you want to. I'm not a watercolor purist, so I'll mix in different mediums. But the white of the paper really is the brightest you can possibly get, so it's really good to try and maintain that anywhere you want a nice true white. And give me just a minute and I'll pull out the colors that I'm using so you know what colors I used to make that background. Keep my watercolors below my desk in a big kind of toolbox thing, just because it's easier for me to handle. So here's the red I use. It's Daniel Smith. I can never pronounce this. Perylene Maroon. Did I say magenta? I did. Okay, well, it's a maroon. It's just probably my favorite dark red that you can possibly get. This is a 15 milliliter tube. I find it's worth the extra money to get a tube this big, just because they last so much longer. The purples are kind of a mixture, but the one I use the most is this Amethyst Genuine. You can see it's just a 5 milliliter tube and it's already almost gone. It's got a beautiful sparkle. They use real amethyst to make this color, and it sparkles so nicely. And then just random sepia. I'm not even sure what brand I used for that. So I'm going to move on to the next section, making sure you guys can see what I'm doing. Just the same as the first, laying down the water. My mentor always said to use a brush either too big or too small for the job. That way you have to pay attention to what you're doing. I think that was his way of saying that I was far too easily distracted when I paint. But I found that's really good advice, because when you have to watch where the edge of your brush is, you really focus a lot better on what you're doing. Whereas if you have a brush the exact size that you need, it's very easy to fall into just being really sloppy like that, and not being very careful with how your paints are laid out. Picking up some purple for this. Now you notice up here it's more purpley and light. I used the exact same technique, but what I did is I didn't layer it quite so much through here, and I let the water, this is just pure water, move the pigments around. There go my dogs, barking at who knows what. And then we're back with the sepia. Gonna let that one dry a bit. I'm gonna start on the next one. This is tricky. If you're going this fast, you want to be very careful not to let the two wet areas touch, otherwise they're just going to blend together. And you're going to lose your nice white lines. And then back to the magenta. putting it on a bit lighter here than I did before, just because I didn't pick up as much pigment. Great thing about this is if you don't get enough, you can always go back and get more. It's at that stage where I need to just kind of dot to get the pigment to drop off. Here's this purple. I'm using a bit of a richer purple than I did over here. I keep dropping my brushes today. And back to the sepia. And let's go with a little bit more purple. Get this nice and dark. It may seem kind of excessive and like you're not really, you know, this is just such a dark color. But when it dries, you can really see the different layers of color as the pigments kind of split up and dry into place. That's what makes it, gives it a lot of life and depth. Moving on to the next one, just pure water. That's all. Try to keep your water as clean as you can, but right now I'm not worrying about changing my water out too much because I'm using essentially the same colors over and over again. And back to that purple. This purple here is called Shadow Violet, and I really like it. It's got this kind of odd gray tone to it. Picking up my sepia. Another nice thing is when you tap the brushes like this and the pigment drops out in little blobs, it pushes the bottom layer of pigmenting out and gives it these really cool kind of feathery textures. I think I need a little bit more red on this one. And back to our purple. Ooh, that was Tucker. He's very grumpy today. I'm not sure why. You need to be pretty patient when you're working like this. I wasn't, so I've got water over where I don't want water, so we're gonna have to wait for that section to dry. What I do in cases where I goof like that is I just move over to a different section and start working on that section instead. Yeah, there's no reason to have to sit and wait and work specifically on one section and one section alone. You can jump around all you want. I'm not going to put any paint on that section that I want to dry and redo, because then it won't blend that nice soft blending that we want in the background. It'll give us some weird hard lines that are fine for the veins here, but not so much for a background. Putting that purple in. And now I'm going to go back to red. I'm really wanting this to stay a lot darker as I go down in the background. I don't want as much brightness as the top area has. And just to switch gears a little, I'm going to move over here. Now, because this space is so big, I can change brushes here if need be, now that my water's got a bit more pigment on it, you can start seeing where I'm laying out the water. But again, always use a brush either too big or too small for your space, so you think about what you're doing. This really is my favorite maroon. It's just such a pretty color, and it changes depending on how much you use. You know, it can be a really soft, light, pale maroon. I'm swapping brushes here because that one doesn't hold as much pigment as I want to lay down. All the way into like a really magnificent dark, dark, dark brick red. Need to put a little more of that maroon on my palette, speaking of. So I used my teeth to unfasten the tube top, and I don't recommend doing that. I have on numerous occasions accidentally got paint in my mouth from doing that. So, not always your best option there. Now look how dark and just what a vibrant red that is. Straight from the tube. Making sure to get all of my reds laid down first. I want this to be a nice even back area. Yes, it's really red. Now I'm swapping over to my purple and see how it tones down that red. Just countering the warm with a cool is all. Oh, I may have to pour more purple out. Swapping to the sepia. I have a lot more water on here than I had in these other areas. So if it's too wet, you just let it dry a little before you keep working on it. In this case, I think it's still okay. So we'll just keep going. I just want to get all of this nice and dark. I'm using that shadow violet again. I'm not using very much sepia because it's an extremely light color, so it will stand out quite a bit more. But I am using some to keep the purple from being too overwhelming, and also because the pigments push each other around and it just makes such cool textures. And I don't want the background to be flat. I want it to have some life. You can probably hear my phone just zinging away. Okay, I'm gonna let that dry a little. Checking to see how this one's drying. It's still a little bit wet. So we'll move over here. Now be careful when you're working over a wet area because it'll be really easy to put your hand into the water and then you'll really regret doing that. At this point you can see that my water is extremely saturated with pigment. For now it's still okay, but I wouldn't use this water for working on anything except for this background at this point. So again, be very careful not to get the water anywhere you don't want paint to be. And then just tapping in that really nice maroon. Now since it's fresh from the tube, it's going to be a lot stronger, so you won't need as much pigment on your brush as you did when it was dry. Really gotta stop saying whenever I'm trying to think of the word I'm looking for. I hate it when I hear people fill their words with uhs and ums when I'm listening to them talk, and then I find myself doing it. It's just infuriating. Swapping back to the purple. Still trying to keep it nice and dark. And see the water, you know, I could just tip the pigment to the water and it spreads where it needs to go. It doesn't get onto the lighter skin or anything like that because I haven't gotten those areas wet. So that's really kind of the key to controlling watercolor paint, is just remembering that the paint is only going to go where water already is. So long as you keep that in mind, it's a lot easier to control than it seems. One thing is, this area is so wet and my paper is slightly angled up on this side that it's starting to pool over here. So what I do is I just tip my paper that way so that the pigments roll back all the way over to fill this area. That's the one time when watercolors won't only stay in the water areas if you got a big puddle of it. If too much builds up, the weight of the water will roll down your page. We don't want that to happen. See, you can see all of this here just spilled right off this edge. It's good to keep paper towels within reach. Mine are kind of far because Tucker picked them up and walked off with them. Just to clean up your workstation a bit. Can't count the number of times I've had a bit of color end up on my desk and then end up in places I really didn't want it to be on the painting. But as Bob Ross says, there are no mistakes, only happy accidents, so when that happens, you just gotta roll with it. Okay, I'm gonna pause for a minute while that dries. This isn't gonna be a very long stream today. I haven't eaten yet, so I'll be wrapping this particular stream up in just a few minutes here. But I want you guys to see and enjoy where it's going. Now, one thing is you'll notice these sections are really dark and there's this sudden change in color to this lighter section, and then over here it's dark too. Don't worry, you can go over once it's dried and very lightly add in water. At this point you've got so much pigment on this area that if you lay the brush down too hard, you're actually going to pick up the pigment, and our goal is to lay down more, not to pick it up. So you lay down the water as gently as possible and then go through and add more pigment. Add a bit of maroon, then I'm going to pick up the purple. You'll notice that I'm just painting along the bottom edge here. It's because I want the two strengths of lighting to blend together. So I'm just darkening along this bottom area. It's pretty simple. And since this area is still wet and I'm noticing that it's lightening up quite a bit, I'm adding some purple because I can see which color is strongest, And right now, what color is strongest is that maroon. So I'm just adding some purple in to give it a bit more of the dark tone that I want it to have. I'm not using very much water. I'm just picking up mostly pure pigment. Just because there's so much water already in place here, it really doesn't need more. Just dropped something. So not too shabby. We're making some pretty good progress on this piece. I am going to pause for now and go find myself some food. I don't know if you guys are hungry, but I am starving. And I will be back later today to work on this some more, and we'll go from there. So, see you guys later.